Welcome to In Focus, Sid Cordell. And we've got to talk about Rochdale, Sid. Everybody else is. We're going to start off with Richard Tice. He was absolutely livid because of the abuse, the threats that his candidate had. They were even outside the polling stations, apparently giving out leaflets to vote for George and co. Now, I say and co, there is a real problem, has been for nearly 30 years in Rochdale. Nobody expected George Galloway to perform so well. They thought he might win, but not by so many. And he's been uncompromising in both the results and the aims. This is Islam in our country, and he's standing as the first of, he hopes, 57 others at the real election. What have you got to say about this lot?
Well, George Galloway is a politician and very, very deceptive. He's got a Palestinian wife, although he himself is not a Muslim. He himself is very much a hard left socialist. He doesn't believe in democracy. Muslims don't believe in democracy, so they don't think, oh, it's, you know, we've got to play fair. We must be. I mean, they're quite happy to break the rules. They don't happy to break any rules. I mean, there's no question that they engage in ballot harvesting, which basically means that they get all their people to apply for postal votes. Anybody on the electoral register to apply for postal votes, and they get people on the electoral register even that are not supposed to be there. And then once the postal votes arrive, they just send their people round to go and pick them up and make sure that they're for the right person. And there is a certain amount of intimidation. I mean, if you don't vote for the person they want you to vote for, then you're in trouble. And as I say, they go and pick them up and then put them in the post. And they're quite happy to intimidate opposition. I mean, they've got no problem with intimidating opposition. The fact that, I mean, in Rochdale, the Reform candidate, Simon Danchuk, wasn't even allowed to attend the hustings. He was banned from the hustings. You know, it's just mad. It's just wrong. But of course, you see, if people have got a British sense of fair play, then they say, oh, this isn't cricket, this isn't right. They're not playing according to the rules. But the Electoral Commission should intervene. But of course, the Electoral Commission doesn't intervene because the Electoral Commission themselves are on the far left. They're not interested in making sure that people like George Galloway play fair. So they just stand back and do nothing. But
you cannot look at figures. You cannot look at figures. Like at the last election, there were 14,000 postal votes. But now suddenly there are 23,000 with less people voting. Now you cannot argue against those figures. Harvesting, call it what you like, but it's corruption. It's also corruption that they threatened the businessmen with bombs if they didn't do what they were told. This is mega. But is it the same thing that happened to Trump? Is it a mirror of that?
Well, it's different. You see, it's interesting. I didn't know that figure that you've just given of 23,000 postal votes compared with 14,000 at the last general election. But you see, it just underlines what I've just said about ballot harvesting and applying for postal votes, is actually confirmed by the statistic that you quoted. So in a sense, what you've just said confirms that what I said was right. And I also, the intimidation as well, you see. I mean, they've got no problem with intimidating people because they don't believe in democracy. No, what's going on in America is completely different. I mean, this isn't, but, what's going on in America is more a mirror image of what goes on in communist countries. You see, I mean, in countries like Venezuela and Belarus and Russia and all these countries, and Cuba, they have elections. But the elections are all rigged, and everyone knows they're rigged. I mean, I think a typical example was Belarus, when, they had a fairly strong opposition campaign with people in the streets. and the indication was that the hard man there, Lukashenko, would be voted out, overwhelmingly voted out. But then he came back with an 83% majority in the election, and it was just like everyone knew that it was rigged. But since then, he's done exactly what Putin does in Russia, just putting his opponents in prison and even killing them. Now, basically what Biden's doing in the United States is a mirror image of that on a smaller scale. So he's just trying to rig the elections and trying to make sure that Trump doesn't get back in. And there have been attempts on Trump's life. They're trying to imprison him in the same way as they imprisoned the opposition in Russia. And, you know, it's just disgusting. But Islam isn't controlling what's going on there. Islam was controlling what went on in Rochdale.
Yeah, let's dig a bit further. We've got a situation here where Rishi comes out last Friday on the doorstep of number 10 and starts saying, I've had enough. We've got to do something about it. Well, yeah, that's the easy part. Is he going to do anything? Because the situation, I repeat, is that we have left and right. Rishi said what so many commentators, politicos have said in the same breath. It's the extreme left we've got to sort out and the extreme right. Now, that is kowtowing to the real situation, Sid. There is an extreme right. It's not pleasant. Joe Cox being the absolute example of this, but Joe, one person, I can quote 50-1 from the left. Why do they even mention this? Because they are acquiescing. They're being cowards. The real problem is not the far right. It's the far left. It's Islamism. And they're being cowards, I repeat.
No, you're completely right. And it's quite interesting. I was reading yesterday about John Brennan, the former head of the CIA. And they were questioning him about what was going on in America. And they were asking him about anti-Semitism. And he said, yes, I agree. There is a problem of anti-Semitism in America. It's all these people on the right who hate Jews and so on and so forth. And he wouldn't even acknowledge that was any anti-Semitism from the left, from Muslims, you know. And he was the head for years. He was the head of the Central Intelligence Agency in America, refusing to even talk about Islamic terrorism. Now, if you've got somebody of his status, you realise there's a massive problem, because the real problem with anti-Semitism is coming from the teaching of Islam. You know, I mean, we can go into it, but I mean, you know, it's what the Quran says, it's what the Hadith says, and so on and so forth. You know, and you know, I've read it, I know what it says. You know, even to the point of burn the Jews with fire. You know, which is there in Surah 4:51 to 56. I mean, in 56 it says burn them with fire, but in Surah 4:51 it makes it clear that they're talking about the Jews. You know, but that's just one example. I mean, the whole Quran shows hatred of the Jews. The whole Islamic religion shows hatred of the Jews. It's endemic in the religion. And, you know, we've got to be honest. We've got to be, you know, we've got to tell the truth. We can't just pretend that it doesn't exist and that it's not real. But I'm afraid the corruption that goes with elections is something which we also have to acknowledge. You know, we've got to acknowledge that George Galloway was elected corruptly. I mean, that's the truth of it, I'm afraid.
He's not a very nice bunny. I mean, he's on his fourth wife at the moment. And when you see him in interviews, he's a bit strong, isn't he? He doesn't like the interviewer. Arrogant, some people say it.
Well, he's very aggressive. I mean, you know, I've seen him when he's been interviewed by Andrew Neil, for instance, who's a very highly respected interviewer, you know, across the board. And George Galloway's just started talking about his personal life. And, you know, it's just like, it's nothing at all to do with the subject of the debate, you know, of what Andrew Neil is questioning him on. But George Galloway's like attacking Andrew Neil personally and refusing to answer the questions that he's being asked. And that's the sort of thing that he does typically, I'm afraid. But interestingly enough, I should also say, by the way, that he's made an effort to get the support of Christians. And when he makes an effort to get the support of Christians, he'll talk about his opposition to homosexuality and his opposition to relationship and sex education, which is true. He does oppose these things. But of course, Muslims oppose these things as well.
Exactly.
And the hard left, Russia opposes these things. But you see, the fact that he opposes these things doesn't mean that he's a friend of Christians. In fact, he hates Christians. He just wants to use Christians to get votes. That's all. And if anyone's fooled by George Galloway, and if any Christians actually vote for him, then frankly, they've been deceived. There's no question.
Well, I mentioned he's having 4 wives, and how relevant is that? Well, I'll tell you how relevant it is, perhaps. So has Boris, so has Trump. Is it a requisite of being a good politician?
No, I think in Donald Trump's case, he's had 3. He's on his 3rd wife. God bless him. But I think it is true that politicians are very much in the public eye, and I guess they meet far more people than a man in the street meets. So I guess there's a lot more opportunities. I mean, you've also got a situation, for instance, where MPs have their home where their wife and children are, and then they have their flat in London which they live in during the week. So I guess they got opportunities to meet other women in their flat in London, and their wife in the constituency probably doesn't even know about it. So there's opportunities there. And also, to be fair, I think some MPs can be quite lonely when they're stuck in their flat in London during the week. And their wife's away in the constituency. If they represent a constituency that's a long way from London, it's just impossible for them to keep going back every night. It's just, so they have to have a flat in London. And I think the pressure's there, the opportunity's there, and you've got to be, strongly morally minded to be faithful. I think that's the reality.
Well, you've said it, Sid. You make a good PR man or a good lawyer with your argument, but you've got to have strong morals to combat it. Quite right. But if we're getting politicians without strong morals, then we're not getting the right politicians, are we?
Oh, well, it's very clear. I mean, it's very clear that the majority of our politicians are not following Christian morality. I mean, that's the reality, and these days, I mean, they're excusing men having sex with children. That's being excused. I mean, I was reading, we can't call it paedophilia anymore. We've got to call it minor attracted persons. And they were even talking about providing sex dolls for paedophilias, which are basically children. So minor attractive persons are being provided with sex dolls so that they can carry out their fantasies. I mean, it's utterly disgusting. But you see, when that sort of thing goes on, the idea that you have to be faithful to your wife or faithful to your husband, I mean, that's just old-fashioned Victorian morals. I mean, the idea.
How close are we to Sodom and Gomorrah?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in Sodom and Gomorrah, I've sometimes referred to that as extreme homosexuality, because there the people were saying, bring out these men so that we can have sex with them. It's like, we've got a right to have sex with whoever enters our city if we want to. It's like, it's a level beyond where we've got to at the moment. But that's what was going on in Sodom. I mean, you can imagine if we continue down the road we're going, the extreme situation could be, I've got a right to have sex with whoever I want to have a right to. This person has visited my town, so I've got a right to have sex with the person that's visited my town. I mean, it's just utterly disgusting, isn't it?
60 million, it has been calculated, Muslims will be living in Europe by the year 2030, not far off, Sid. Islamization is going on apace, and it's being funded. The Arab states are no longer buying our Premiership football clubs. They are putting up temples throughout countries, throughout Europe, and especially in Britain. They're building schools, Islamist schools in Britain. Now, what may be underlining this is that as an infidel, you have three choices to be offered by the Muslims when they gradually, eventually, some people think, take over, although they already have done in at least 15 towns in Britain, mainly in the north of England. You've got three choices. You've got A, conversion to Islam. Yeah, okay, they're a proselytizing religion, as is Christianity. So it's a choice. Then you've got something called dhimmitude. Now, as a scholar of Islam for the last 10 years, have I pronounced that right, Sid?
Yeah, you're a dhimmi, that's correct, yes.
Okay, as a dhimmi, you've got a choice to be a dhimmi. What does that mean? Well, it means that you're under subjection, big time, and you pay nearly twice as many taxes as the ordinary Muslim. So you're going to be tolerated if you've got a bit of brass and pay for your status. Not that it's a very elevated status. And then, of course, you can choose the sword, which I don't think most people would choose. So there's your three choices under Islam. I'm glad there's some sensible nations on this earth that see it, that get it. India, they're after India, big time. So what's happened there? Well, the first thing they're doing as we speak is to pass a personal law. Because, of course, like Britain, like Europe, the Islamists want Sharia law, and they've got it in various parts. They're not having any of this in India. They're specifically passing a law now saying a personal law outstrips any Sharia law or indeed any other law. It maintains the status of women, because you know more than most people what the status of women is under Islam. So yes. Why does India get it? Why does India take steps? And the rest of the cowardice of Europe carries on doing what they're doing?
Well, because you see, India's experienced it firsthand. I mean, they basically had a civil war in India between Hindus and Muslims. And the result of that was that India was split, and part of India became Pakistan. You know, it was West Pakistan and East Pakistan originally, and then East Pakistan became Bangladesh. So they basically split the country into the Hindu part and the Muslim part. But you know, obviously, there's still a large number of Muslims in the Hindu part. But you know, having experienced it firsthand, they know what they're up against. You see, we've never experienced living under Islam in the West. But what we need to have is a proper open debate of what the Islamic religion is like, you know, and what it's like to live under Islam. You see, at the moment, what we've got from the Crown Prosecution Service, from the police, from the civil service, from the media, you know, you cannot criticize Islam. If you criticize Islam, you're Islamophobic. You see, they won't. It's interesting. See, once when they did interview me on the BBC, one of the questions they put to me was, "You say Islam is a false religion?" And I said, "Yes." And it's like, what a ridiculous question, really, because where do you start? But I said to them, "Yes, I mean, I know full well what the Quran says. The Quran says to kill disbelievers. The Quran says to cut off the heads of disbelievers. It says if in a woman you find disobedience, you should beat her. And it talks about divorce for child brides who've not yet menstruated." I'll tell you what, they couldn't get me off soon enough. I mean, it was like, you know, there was somebody else in the studio, Owen Jones. Right, Owen, what's your response to what's being said here? I mean, it was literally, you know, they're not interested in any information about on the BBC of what the Quran says. I mean, Tom Holland, bless him. I mean, he's written a book, In the Shadow of the Sword, which looks at the rise of Islam and shows that the rise of Islam was extremely violent and where it came from. And he did a film, Islam, the Untold Story, which exposes the violence and exposes basically that the whole narrative of the rise of Islam is a false narrative. The truth is that it rose in violence and has always been a very violent religion. Now, the BBC used to put it on. I mean, Channel 4 put it on, but they were supposed to put it on a second time, and they had threats and so on and so forth, and so they refused to put it on. We're in a situation now where the Labour Party are saying, if we're re-elected, we're going to have a new law which is going to make it illegal to be Islamophobic. So what they're saying is it's going to be illegal to criticise Islam. That's what they're saying. So the things I've just talked about is going to be against the law. So if we have a Labour government next time, we won't be able to say what the Quran says. It'll be illegal. We won't be able to say what Muhammad was like or the origins of Islam. It'll be illegal to talk about it. And it's just utter nonsense. We've got to go in the opposite direction. The right direction is to say open debate. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the truth. Let's see what Islam is really like. And let's decide whether we want to live under this sort of Islamic government or not. I mean, that's what we should be doing.
We are saying, you are saying, we've got to have a debate on it. Sid, be open. You're not going to get a debate because there's too many of this persuasion in our universities, in the civil service, in government to let you have a free debate. I'll give you an example. They're out to get GB News. Now, GB News comes the closest of any media to freedom of speech. And Ofcom, horror of Ofcom, have got at least 11 cases about individual presenters, including Jacob Rees-Mogg. They're having a real go. Now, I have had personal dealings with people like Ofcom. I'll use this as an illustration. We showed a film on what happens in an abortion with the suitable warnings before the program and after. One person complained, that's all. My goodness me, the hoops we had to go through, the accusations made, take the thing down, do it again, and you're off the air. It was appalling, but this is Ofcom, and they ain't got any better. Now, with people that's in control of free speech, with all the rest of the judicial system, not all of it, of course, but a large proportion of it is, freedom of speech no longer exists like it used to do, Sid. How are we going to get it back?
Okay, I mean, I have to say first, I'm not interested in freedom of speech. What we're interested in is the right to tell the truth, because I don't believe in a right to tell lies, but I believe in a right to tell the truth. So that's what I believe in. And of course, when the GB News are telling the truth, and what I talked about earlier, I mean, what I was saying was completely truthful about what the Quran says. They did not want that on the BBC. So it's the truth that we have to have a right to tell, and we have to fight for the right to tell the truth and to expose truth. I mean, that's what we're fighting for, and we just got to keep exposing it. We've got to expose Ofcom and expose their agenda. We've got to expose the civil service and expose their agenda. We've got to expose the BBC and expose their agenda. We've got to expose the Metropolitan Police and expose their agenda. I mean, for what they've done in arresting street preachers. You see what you said about a complaint. I mean, they arrested a street preacher on the basis of one complaint. And interestingly enough, the Metropolitan Police, in order to try and justify their actions, actually published the complaint. And the complaint, when they published it, was so obviously lies, because they were saying, "Oh, these people," they said, "we're talking about the way homosexuals have sex and it being disgusting to put your sexual organ up the backside of another man." They were saying all this stuff. It's like, You know full well they weren't saying that. What they were saying was that homosexuality is sin, which is what the street preacher admitted he was saying. So they made up stuff to make it sound as though he was saying things that were disgusting, that were obviously untrue. But instead of the police going to the street preacher and saying, we've had allegations that you were talking about the sexual acts that homosexuals engage in, is this true? And he said, no way. I said nothing like that. All I said was that I believe homosexuality is sin. That's all I said. The police could have just responded and said, yes, we didn't think the allegation was true. Thank you. But they couldn't have taken those allegations to court. Obviously, they couldn't. The only way they could have taken something to court was if it was recorded. So what the police should have said is, right, have you got a recording of what he was saying? No, I haven't. Have you got a recording of this? No, I haven't. Well, I'm sorry, we can't do anything then. And that's what they should have said. But instead of that, they on the basis of one complaint, they're engaging in harassment. But we've just got to keep exposing it and keep attacking it. And we've got to use social media. It's very interesting, you see. Biden in the last election was determined to control social media. And they controlled social media to the extent that when Hunter Biden's laptop came out, which was exposed by the New York Post, which was a bit like the Daily Mail, I suppose, they exposed the New York Post exposed it, but they just silenced it. They silenced it on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of the social media. Anybody that mentioned Hunter Biden's laptop was silenced. And of course, they came up with this ridiculous drummed up thing that all the past heads of agencies were saying that it was bore all the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And that's what Biden said in the debate with Trump. This is just Russian disinformation. So he knew full well it wasn't Russian disinformation. He knew he was lying, but they controlled social media so the truth didn't come out. So that's what I'm talking about. We don't need to say, we're fighting for free speech. We're fighting for the truth. We're fighting the truth has to come out. And he said they hate the fact now that they don't control X. They hate the fact they don't control the Daily Mail. They hate the fact they don't control GB News. And they're doing their level best. They're trying to get Elon Musk in prison now, because they've got to get him in prison because they can't control X. So they've got to put him in prison. They've got to put Trump in prison. I mean, but they won't win. In the end, they won't win.
Well, that's great to know. People would say, well, we hope so. But the way it's going, Sid, the signs are not good. We have lots of things going on. Let's concentrate. Something that you just said about free speech and control. Now, we are trying to control the internet with the gross pornography on it, especially the dark net. And you've got certain people who will draw a borderline between what is acceptable. I'm not saying what is good. I'm saying what is acceptable and what is clearly not acceptable. But how do you balance this freedom of speech or the truth? Bit of a nuance there, debate for another day. How do you balance it? Somebody's got to draw the line somewhere between black and white. Too much grey at the moment everywhere, isn't there?
Well, that's why I say we're not campaigning for freedom of speech. We're campaigning for truth, because you see, the thing is, people say, you believe in freedom of speech, so do you believe in the right for someone to walk into a cinema and shout fire when there's no fire? You say, no, I don't. I don't believe in the right for someone to tell lies. But obviously we draw a distinction between people who genuinely believe what they're saying is truth, even though it might be wrong. It's like, I believe in debate, and obviously sometimes when you're in debate, people can say things that are untrue. But there's a difference between that and saying something that is untrue, that is deliberately untrue. And that's what I was talking about with Hunter Biden's laptop. They knew full well it wasn't Russian disinformation, but they were saying something that was false deliberately to hide the truth. That's what is wrong. That's what is terrible. And that's what we must keep exposing and expose it again and again. You see, but it is being exposed in America with Republicans controlling Congress. I mean, everything which they did with Hunter Biden's laptop is now out in the open. They know it's true. The New York Times admitted that the laptop is genuine. You know, they know what it says implicates Joe Biden. They're trying to put Joe Biden through impeachment. You know, the media are desperately saying there's no evidence, there's no evidence. Well, there's masses of evidence. And hopefully the Republican Congress will impeach Biden before in plenty of time before the election. But there should be a full debate in the Senate, as happened with Trump. So everything that Biden's been doing is properly exposed and comes out into the open. Our weapon is the truth. That's our weapon, and we've got to use it and use it again and again.
We've mentioned that the Indian subcontinent gets it. UK especially doesn't, in my humble opinion. And talking about GB News this very morning, Eamon Holmes was having a rant on his show. Now, he's having a rant because when he walks along any street, especially in Northern Ireland, he sees hotels being occupied by illegal immigrants. He sees people trying to look after the children and then being put in substandard accommodation, little children who are dying through infections caused by mold. So we don't look after our own, we look after illegal immigrants and put them in posh accommodation. Now, this is immoral. There are universal immoral laws, ECHR, that are promoting this, and lawyers and governments are hiding behind it. There is absolutely no reason, back to the word coward and courage, that we can't get out of ECHR, but we're not willing. Rishi could do this tomorrow.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, but obviously, one of the problems they've got is that it's going to come under vicious attack from the media if he withdraws from the European Court of Human Rights.
Australia didn't bother with that, Sid.
Yeah. One thing I would like to say at this point is, we've talked an awful lot about Islam, but we have to draw a distinction between the people and the religion. And the fact is that surveys have shown that about 30% of all Muslims are basically support radical Islam. So they support all the teaching of Islam. But that means there's about 70% of Muslims who don't, but most of them just go along with it. But you see, just as in Christianity, we've got vast numbers of nominal Christians, as well as people that are really committed and devoted to the faith. A radical Christian will be radically loving, because that's what Jesus taught, to love our enemies, to do good to those who hate us. Radical Muslims will be radically violent. But there are an enormous number of nominal Muslims that will maybe observe Ramadan a bit, but they won't be too concerned about it. They may pray a bit, but they won't be going to the mosque 5 times a day as radical Muslims will. And they'll say, I'm a Muslim and, whatever, but they won't be particularly devoted to the religion. Now, I want to say that because I've come across a lot of Muslims that are very nice people. And there are a lot of Muslims that are very nice people, that are very kind and caring and so on and so forth. And it's the same applies to immigrants. I mean, there are a lot of immigrants that are very nice people and kind and caring, and a lot of them have got genuine stories. But where there is abuse, and there is a lot of abuse, obviously those that abuse the system, make it very hard for people that are genuine. And we've got to try and draw the distinction between people that are genuine and people that are abusing the system. And that's why we need to process these cases speedily, quickly, and weed out the genuine from those that are abusing the system. And we talked about this last week, and there's various things that we need to do so that we can actually do that efficiently and effectively.
Right, we're going to move on. There you go. We'll give you a bit of light relief. No, it's not that light relief. It's to do with, well, Wales, Pembrokeshire in particular. They've decided as an autonomous region that they're going to increase council tax by 16%. My goodness me, who's allowed that to happen? Well, the Tories that are not Tories, of course. They've allowed so many things that are un-Tory to happen. This is just another one. They've allowed the fact that if you are a second home owner, you're going to be paying twice as much rates. And if the Welsh, especially Plaid Cymru, have their own way, it's going to be 3 times as much, at least, rates. And it won't be long before that spreads back to England or certain parts of England, no doubt. Now, that's been agreed by the UK government. Let's go back to England from Wales. Perhaps you might see a link here between autonomy, socialism, because Wales is very socialist, and what's happened in our cities that are going bankrupt in England. And let's look at Birmingham. My goodness me, what a mess. They've actually had to call in some civil servants, actually very skillful civil servants, to take over the running of that. But time after time after time, you get Labour-led councils, sometimes Tory-led councils, but not in comparative numbers, that have got no experience. They couldn't run a riot, never mind run a business. And there, these unqualified people are running multi-billion type businesses. I mean, it's a massive business, Birmingham. And what a mess. Well, I'm not surprised. Nearly £750 million. Oh, we'll build a village, the Commonwealth village they built. And lo and behold, we didn't have one athlete there. They got sidestepped. It wasn't used. Now it is being used for social housing. But you can't make decisions like that. If you're a company, you're out of business straight away. But you're not if you govern a town or a city even. So it's a mess. What we're going to do about it? Well, the pleasure will come to the people of Birmingham, because they've got to pay 10% extra this year, 10% extra next year. We can't afford it. It's the Tories that have done this. No, it's not. More blame certainly is on the left socialist side than the Tory side. But there we are. People have their own opinions. But what a mess people are in, Sid.
Yeah, I mean, everything you've said is absolutely spot on. There are some councils which have got into a terrible financial mess, but what it's about is effective management of finances. I've sat on a city council, and I've been involved in a situation where the city council was failing to manage their finances correctly, and the end result was massive increases in rates. But then the government stopped they stopped the rate increases, so they then had to behave differently. But of course, Birmingham City Council is massively overspent. They failed to manage their finances, and the way they behaved is not surprising. They made a massive mistakes with the Commonwealth Games, which were very significant. But you see, this is typical of socialism. You see, we've got a situation. It's also been revealed just in this last week that Rachel Reeves, who is the Shadow Chancellor, had a £4,000 credit card and exceeded the credit card limit, so she had the credit card taken away from her. Now, the person who is wanting to be the next Chancellor is unable to manage her own personal finances. Now, why on earth should somebody who is unable to manage their own personal finances be allowed to run the finances of the country? You see, and it's typical. This is typical of socialism. You see, what they believe is spend, 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 spend. And Margaret Thatcher once made an interesting statement when she said the problem with socialism is at the end they run out of spending other people's money. Yes, we had this ridiculous thing when from 2010 when they launched this attack on austerity. I mean, the truth was that Labour left office in 2010 with massive overspending, 146 billion deficit, and we had to do something about it. It was completely unsustainable. And the Labour Party didn't know what to do. I mean, they literally said, we don't know what to do. And, it's like, and the Conservatives, and they came in with the coalition, they all agreed we've got to cut spending, and then we led this massive attack on austerity. How dare they cut spending? It's terrible what they've done. It's terrible what the Tories have done in cutting spending. It was all caused by the overspending of the Labour Party. That's what caused it, and they had to cut it. And before COVID, they actually got it right down from 146 billion to about 38 billion. They successfully reduced the deficit. They reduced it by cutting revenue spending or maintaining or increasing capital spending. But what they should have done, by the way, is to cut quangos rather than cutting spending on frontline services. But of course, the civil service come along and say, oh, if you're going to cut spending, you're going to have to close schools, we'll have to close hospitals, and it's like, no, we don't. That's not what we do. What we do is to get rid of all these quangos, get rid of them, cut spending on them, and that's how we effectively save money. But the reality is you have to live within your means. And every government should be living within their means. Every council should be living within their means. Every person should be living in their means financially. That's something else, by the way. Rachel Reeves is earning 86,000 a year. Her husband is earning 172,000 a year. And she said, I can't make ends meet. I'm spending more than I've got coming in. It's a farce. And the vast majority of people in the country would say that's a farce. It's farcical. Everybody should be living within their means and managing their finances effectively.
Well, the last nail in the Birmingham coffin, of course, is because of political cant. Well, I want my rights. Well, yeah, rights, but let's have it come with responsibilities. And they backdated the equal pay, although there's a lot to be said about equal pay for equal work. Not much is. It's just equal pay whatever happens. For women, they decided to backdate it 10 years. And therefore, that created an immediate bill of 1.2 billion. How can you possibly run a company like that? Well, you can't. And this is what happens, I'm afraid, when the political target overcomes common sense, basically. Right, let's move on again, if we can, Sid. And we can move on to DEFRA. Well, why DEFRA? Well, it's come up with a scheme that is about recycling. Lots of schemes at the moment that are killing the economy. People talk about what's really wrong with Britain. Well, there is a lot wrong with Britain and other countries. But one of the things is recycling, or the green disease, as I call it. If you killed the green disease and people voting for real climate control, we wouldn't have the problem. It's costing Britain billions and billions and billions. Sure, there are problems with immigration, with education, with the NHS. Real problem is this wretched green. Everybody must have an electric vehicle. Everybody's got to get to net zero by 2035 or 2050, depending on who's in control of what particular department. It's a nonsense. It's costing billions. Who's gaining? Well, the controllers are gaining, whether you want to call them the World Economic Forum, the bigwigs, the ones that you can't get at. It's all part of the design. And let's coalesce all that. And let's get down to an individual thing here. Because it's been decided that all the companies will have to take back their electrical goods. Fine. It's called a toaster tax. Tories again brought this in. Now, Currys, I think they're called something else these days, are a conglomerate of 3 companies. Keep saying there's not much profit in selling televisions, washing machines, and toasters. Well, compared with other goods, they're right. They reckon it's £3 for every 100. They get £3 profit for every £100 they sell. Well, if you multiply that up by massive purchases, you can still make a crust, and they do make it on other things because you're always, as we say in the north of England, mithered, which translated means got at. For extra insurance, extend the insurance on your television, etc. That's where the real money is made. Something similar to the car sales industry, in actual fact. It's the peripherals. So they don't want to do this. Although what a lot of people don't realise, Sid, is if you're selling more than 100,000 goods a year, and most are, they have to take back your old freezer, fridge, television set, toaster. So make them aware of this when you're buying from the big boys, well, even the medium-sized boys. But this is yet another law which is going to cost somebody money. Everybody now has to take back second-hand goods for recycling. Now, that's quite different from Spain in many ways, because here we have our dustbins collected every day of the year. Not once a week, not once a fortnight, once a month, every day of the year. And by the bins, you can put out your mattresses, your television sets, whatever you want, and it's collected. Now, how can Spain do that? And let me tell you, we only pay £100 a year for a collection of our rubbish. What are you paying in the UK? What's going on?
Yes, it's interesting. You can learn an awful lot from other countries and the way other countries do it. And you think, okay, well, that's interesting. Maybe we should introduce that into our country. But I mean, rubbish is now collected far more efficiently than it was 50 years ago, when we used to have steel bins that had to be physically lifted and, were very difficult to carry. And the bin men, because the average person couldn't actually lift their bin, the bin men had to be strong males and, had to go and get the bin from the back of every house and bring it out to the front. And then they had to lift it onto the dust cart to empty it. I mean, and it was an enormously physically, difficult job. And now we've got the wheelie bins, which are easy just to wheel around and put out on the appropriate day. We've made an enormous amount of progress. We've made enormous progress in efficiency. And the numbers of bin men as a result on each bin lorry is a lot less. I remember it used to be seven men, per bin lorry to do the job. Now you probably have 2 or 3. And it's much more efficient. Plus, there's a lot of recycling. So, but there's always, you can look at different ways of doing things and doing things better. And that's something. More efficiency is something which has to go on all the time, and that has to be welcomed. But on the main issue that we're talking about which is net zero, I think there's a growing resistance to net zero. I mean, I said in the 2017 election, which was 7 years ago now, this whole climate change is being used as a reason to create a one world government, which I felt that was the situation at the time, because it's like, if it was true that we've got a massive problem with carbon emissions, and if we don't reduce the carbon emissions, then the world will cease to exist. I mean, if that was true, then it's not something that can be solved by one country. I mean, our carbon emissions are less than 1% of the international carbon emissions. So Britain, by cutting its carbon emissions, can't really do anything effective for the climate. I mean, you've got to look at China and India and countries that are the biggest emitters of carbon, and got to make sure that they're on board, because if they're not on board, what we do is largely irrelevant. But they're not talking like that. They're talking as if we can solve the problem. If we solve the problem, the problem will be solved, which is just nonsense. But we don't want a one world government. And what they're trying to do as well, by the way, with the World Health Organization, with these pandemics, they're trying to make all that into a need for a one world solution. We can't solve pandemics with individual countries. We've got to have a one world solution to pandemics. Well, the best thing is to stop the pandemics in the first place and get rid of these labs that are producing these horrible diseases. But we can go on, but they're trying to make the case for one world government for economics. And now they're trying to use this whole one world government agenda, even to the extent of imposing abortion on the whole world. They're saying this is a human right. Imposing same-sex marriage on the whole world. They're saying this is a human right. They're trying to impose it on African countries. And they're basically saying the whole world has now got to accept abortion. The whole world's got to accept same-sex marriage. And this is part of the one world agenda. It's evil. Let's be honest. It's evil.
Well, we've been talking about good and we've been talking about evil. It's a pity that each individual country doesn't realise, and I don't think we do realise what a potential morass we are in, what's going to get us out of it. Dare I say to a politician, we need more than political venture, Sid. Yes, I know you believe in the truth, and I know as a Christian you believe in the truth of the gospel. Is it essential to receive or get hold of the rightness in all this by including the spiritual?
Well, of course, because the spiritual is absolutely fundamental. You see, and what we're up against is New Age. A lot of people don't really realise what New Age is, and I'm not going to go into great detail now, but suffice to say that chapter 3 in my book, Authority Over the Nations, God and Politics, I go into the whole New Age beliefs, and I, the title of the chapter is the Satanic Agenda. We have to know what we're up against, and that is what we're up against. The whole thing is satanic, and what they want to do is to stop Christians preaching the gospel. They want to silence us, and so that they want to stop any children in schools learning about Christianity and learning about Christian teaching. They've got to teach children only New Age teaching, which is basically promoting homosexuality, promoting immorality, and promote it, from tiny children. That's the agenda that's going on at the moment. We've got to be honest about what we're facing, but they don't win in the end. In the end, we win, but we have to stand for truth, because what Jesus said, we have to pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. So we don't just wait for heaven. We've got to see God's will done on earth. That's our task. And, we've got to keep campaigning for it, exposing the evil, standing for the truth. And in the end, we win.
There we are. It's a positive note. Let's finish on a double positive note. And your friend, the Trump man in America, has come out with a wonderful phrase that Harry's not got to turn up with a begging bowl, Prince Harry, to him. Well, there we are. Harry and Meghan are not really liked too much in the United Kingdom, and also now it appears in the US. Trump looks as though at the moment, and Biden, they're going to be the two finalists for the election. It looks as though Trump will win. Nothing certain, Sid. It depends what shenanigans the Democrats get up to. Go on, be a prophet. What's going to happen in November?
Okay, well, first, as far as Prince Harry is concerned, he's been his own worst enemy, frankly. Meghan Markle said if she wants to be, by the way, a Democrat candidate for president. And she said, if Trump gets elected, I'll leave the country. Well, it's like, okay, well, if that's, they can't say things like that and then expect Trump to do them a favor. But Harry actually said in his book that he's been on drugs and so on and so forth. But that would actually affect his visa in the United States, and it hasn't been declared. He also said, by the way, in his book that he killed 25 Taliban, which is a stupid thing to say because he makes himself a target, frankly. And one of the things they said in the army, you never boast about the number of people you've killed, in a battle. He's broken the taboo, frankly. And what he's doing in the court cases as well. I mean, I can understand in court cases where he feels as though his phone has been hacked and his personal privacy has been abused. I can understand that. But when he's taking the government to court for not giving him adequate security, then that just looks like selfishness, frankly, because he obviously is being given security. His security is dealt seriously, but he says, well, I want more security. I'm taking the government to court for not giving me enough. I mean, people just think that's irresponsible. The whole tradition of the royals is that they never take anything to court. So going to court for something which, frankly, is just selfish, makes him look bad. But I don't blame Donald Trump for one moment for anything he says about Harry and Meghan, given the fact that what they've said about him, that they've spoiled their own copybook.
Well, there you go. We've had an insight into American politics and a double insight into British politics. Not a pretty sight at the moment. Interesting time, Sid. You're not going to get bored, are you?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's there's a lot going on at the moment. Of course, we've got a general election coming up, and life is hectic. This week, by the way, on Thursday, we've got a very good candidate in the Lewisham Mayor by-election, and we're hoping to make some progress. And when it comes to May, we're hoping to get someone elected onto the London Assembly. We need 100,000 votes from the whole of London. It's proportional representation, and we can do it. We got just under 30,000 last time, but we're working a lot harder this time, producing videos to go around the churches and very much hoping that we can get the 100,000 votes.
Well done. We'll look forward to next week. Thank you, Sid.
Thank you.